أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان الرجيم من همزه ونفخه ونفثه بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على رسولنا محمد وعلى آله وصحبه ومن والاه. Okay, so today we're going to go into a little bit of the pretty much how to frame different experiences in life and how to look at tests and difficulties and trials. So first, before we do that, a sort of a check-in. How's everyone doing? How has everything been in terms of tests, trials, in terms of how you've been framing things, in terms of how you're navigating things, just overall, how is everything, especially amidst the context of COVID-19 and the changes that have taken place thus far in the past 4 months, let's say. To review, we talked about what shapes our worldviews. In other words, what is the source of our worldviews? Where are we getting our truths? Where are we getting our perceptions, our perceptions of reality, right? Where are we getting that from? And we had discussed before where that's coming from. We mentioned experiences shape our worldview, our perspectives. We have experiences like education. We have interactions that we have with our friends and families. We have these biases in our societies, good or bad. We talked about biases could be good or bad. So we have these things that are around us, and we've sort of adapted them as truth. We have stereotypes that we've grown up into, and we've sort of become we've sort of adopted them without realizing them. Some of them we've sort of rejected them because society rejected them, but some of them we sort of accepted because everyone else is accepting them, and we kind of like we were navigating according to that, right? And a lot of that was what I would call like a human experience, which is thus far whatever has and I differentiated this from guidance. I said the human experience, the way I'm referring to it, and somebody else might have a different way that they're presenting it in a different context, right? But my usage over here is specifically only the human experience that comes from whatever humans have experienced, whatever they've experimented with, whatever knowledge that they've sort of acquired by themselves, not from getting external guidance from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So not including the Quran and the Sunnah and so on, right? So that's what I mean when I mention that. So where is that information? How does that impact our worldview? How does that impact us in terms of how we make decisions, how we look at things? That's what we were talking about in terms of what shapes our worldview. And in the same context, we talked a little bit about how the brain works. We talked about the neurons. We talked about plasticity of the mind. We talked about those, and then we talked about the lines of best fit. We said these are sort of the schemas that we have mentally adopted, and everything sort of fits within that framework. And sometimes it becomes difficult for us to navigate them, right? Sometimes difficult for us to let go and sort of disconnect and sort of adopt the reality. And so that's the capital T truth. And then this is what the next part is, differentiating between capital T truth and lowercase t truths, where the capital T truths are real, like this is what reality looks like, and capital T truths are our projection, our understanding of it. In other words, what we think the reality is, or what it looks like, or what it should look like, that's small t truth. What it is, what the reality is, that's the capital T truth. So we get these usually from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And this is something that, in terms of conviction, in terms of certainty, that's what comes from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In terms of having some doubt about it, meaning there's no confirmed certainty with it, usually it's these small t truth that have that kind of certainty, right? Sometimes, okay, let me rephrase that. Our experiences can sometimes hit the nail on the head sort of with the capital T truth, but sometimes they won't, or many times they won't by themselves, which is why we had to get guidance Because if it wasn't for the fact that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala guided us, a lot of us would be sort of confused. We would have some sort of understanding that we have to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala because of the fitrah, but at the same time, we wouldn't know how to worship Him. And so we would be doing a guess and check sort of trial and error method on and on, over and over again. Everyone would have their own different set of ways to getting closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And if you notice nowadays, that's exactly what people are doing. They're focusing on this idea of non-ritualistic based religions, right? The idea that I'm just really spiritual, but I'm not really, I don't adopt a very specific methodology of religion, right? I'm gonna worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as I want to. I'm not gonna worship Him the way that He is telling us, essentially, right? That I don't believe in this system of you need to do this a very certain way and you can't do it any other way and stuff, right? So this is what people have sort of adopted. They just want to worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala the way they want to, not the way He has legislated or He has asked us to. So this is, it sort of defeats the point of worship, because worship is submission. That's what it means, right? Ibadah means submission to whoever it is that you're submitting to. And so, like ubudiyya, right? And the entire aspect behind it, the concept behind it is that is to submit to whoever it is that you're worshiping. That's what it means. If you go into the linguistic meaning and so on, so that's what it is. And if I tell Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, no, you can't tell me how I need to worship you, I'm gonna worship you the way I want to, then that defeats the whole point of our ubudiyya. That defeats the whole point of servitude to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? And so that's what people are doing right now, because they're not accepting capital T truth. They want it to be the way they want it to be. So if I think that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala should be worshipped by praying only once a day, then it should be okay, because that's my way of connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and Allah is supposed to accept my way, right? So that's the opposite of submission. That's not how you worship somebody. You're supposed to submit to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So people have these egos that they don't want to let go of. So that's where the conflict happens a lot of times. So this is the next part: sources of stress. When we don't want to accept the capital T truths because we believe that our lowercase truths are definitely capital T truths, then we have these conflicts and we have this stress and we get worried and we get frustrated and we get annoyed. All these negative feelings that we have is because of that. Now, in certain contexts, anger is okay, right? Because the Prophet ﷺ did get angry sometimes, but it was only because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of legislated that anger. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of required that of the Prophet ﷺ. So this was part of the guidance. Like, you're supposed to get upset when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is being mocked, for example, or when bad things are happening and stuff, and people can stop, but they're not. And so pretty much people are taking others' rights away and stuff. So you're supposed to get mad at these things, because that's like sort of the initial step before you try to resolve it. So you're supposed to feel that this is off the way it's supposed to be, and I'm supposed to show my displeasure with this so that I can address it thereafter, so that people know that this is wrong. So that's the first step, and then you can act according to that, and then you navigate in terms of guiding people back to the path and so on. Or you might give people their truths back to them, or their rights back to them. So this is these are some of the sources of stress that we did discuss. We also talked about truths, meaning what does reality look like, and we talked about maqasid sharia, the objectives, the high objective sharia, and the lowest level was the 5 essentials that we talked about. And these are the 5 protections from the Sharia. And some people have also added a 6th one, but others have taken 2 of them and merged them together into one category, so they made them 5. So this is, that's that. But the idea pretty much is how do you look at everything? So what's the framework of everything? So the framework is very important over here. Having the Maqasid Sharia as the framework is going to help you in terms of navigating, understanding the truths, and sort of accepting them as truths, and recognizing them when you see them, and being able to let go of your lowercase t truths when you see the capital T truths. So then we talked about a sample list of certain truths, capital T truths versus lowercase truths. And this is what we did last time before we close. And so today, inshallah, I want to see if we can add on a little bit to that list. And then after that, we're going to go into looking into some capital T truths from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, so that we can understand how to navigate life, how to navigate difficulties, and what the purpose of these tests and trials and stuff are in the first place. Because when we understand them, then we can frame according to that, and once we frame it, then our outlook on life and tests becomes very different. It becomes more of an empowering thing as opposed to more of a demotivating thing, frustrating thing. Right? It's supposed to be something that helps us stay motivated and constantly, trying to get to higher levels. And when we discussed this a little bit before, when we talked about games and how that works. So let me get out of this really quick, and now you guys can tell me if there's anything else that you want to add on to these before we move on to the next part. I'll give you one in the meantime as you guys are coming up with something. So capital T truth is sustainable growth. Sustainable growth mindset. Okay, so one of the things that Islam tells us is to go slowly, or sorry, be consistent, even if it's a small growth, right? The Prophet ﷺ told Aisha that the best of deeds, when she asked him, he said the best of deeds are the ones that are consistent, even if they're small, even if they are little, few, right? Even if they're very few, it doesn't matter. As long as they're consistent, that's the most important thing. The most beloved deed to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the deeds to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are the ones that are done consistently, because it shows that you once you started it, that you had this intention of continuing it. The Sahaba radiallahu anhum, when they used to start something, they would commit to it. So if they started something, they would commit to it until they died. Right? And this is something that is known about the Sahaba. And so this is something that we also take as an example for us. If you want to start something, make sure that you start small, so that you can sustain it, you can maintain it until the day you die. Right? If you've been fasting Mondays and Thursdays, make it a life goal, because that's something that you're going to do for the rest of your life. So if you want to start, you can start, let's say, if you feel like 2 days is going to be very overwhelming, you can do 1 day, right? Or if that's too much, then you can do the 13th, 14th, and 15th of the lunar month, and you can fast those days, right? Because that's another thing that you could do. So you could do 3 days a month. If you can't do that, then at least do one of them, right? One day of the month, but just maintain it, and don't go beyond what you can sustain. If you can't sustain that, don't do it, right? Because unless you're doing it like once in a while or whatever and stuff, just because. But remember that the most beloved deeds of Allah are the ones that are consistent. So that's the very important part over here. And that also means that you can break down larger chunks of things into smaller sections. So for example, if you want to read the Quran, maybe you haven't read the Quran for a long time. Maybe you only read it in Ramadan, right? But what if you broke it down into chunks? So if there's about 600 some pages in the Quran, then you could do 2 pages a day, for example, right? And then you're going to be done by next Ramadan. So that's another way you can look at it. But the mindset that a lot of people have is that the all or nothing mindset. That either you grow all at once or you don't do it at all. So when they want to lose weight, for example, and I mention this because this is one of the most common New Year's resolution, right? I think it's the most common, if not the most common. Anyways, so when you want to lose weight, instead of thinking that I'm going to lose, like, let's say 10 pounds, or if you want to lose 30 pounds or 50 pounds or 100 pounds, whatever you want to lose, right? Whatever your goal is. So instead of looking at it as I need to lose it today or yesterday, right? You look at it as breaking it down into chunks and say every day I might lose 1 ounce, for example, and it might take 16 days to lose a pound, right? But that's okay, because if I remain consistent like this, then I'm going to be able to eventually get to a point where I'm going to lose the amount that I want to lose, right? As opposed to year after year setting the same resolution and failing and then being depressed over it because feeling like, I can't do this, it's too much for me and stuff, and I'm not a good person, I can't hold commitments and stuff like that. That negative cycle that we fall into and we don't accomplish something the way we want it to, then it's avoiding that. You can do it a different way. You can say, let me break it down into chunks, and that's a word that I want to use later on. So chunk is a keyword that I want to hold on to. So we sort of look at it as I need to do it right now. So if you did it 16, let's say 16 days, roughly for a pound. So let's say in a month you lose 2 pounds. So in a year you're going to lose 24 pounds, and in 2 years you're going to lose 50 pounds. That in itself is, that might be the goal that a lot of people have. So if you do it consistently day after day, it might be just 1 ounce a day, and 1 ounce is very, very little. It's like, nothing essentially, right? So if you do it consistently like that, 2 years later, you're going to have 50 pounds lost if you wanted to lose 50 pounds. A year later, you can have, 25 pounds, let's say, right? Or in 6 months, you're going to lose about 12 pounds. I mean, these are goals that you can sort of look forward to. If you want to lose only 5 pounds, then you can do it in 3 months, right? So understanding how to navigate these things is very important. It helps you kind of be able to stay sustainable. Now, in this case, a lot of people want to become millionaires tonight, right? So they're going to go gambling, they're going to do lottery and stuff like that because they want to become millionaires today. They also go into things that are, they also a lot of times are going to look at life like that. Like they want to graduate from college or whatever tonight. They can't wait for 4 years or 10 years or whatever and stuff. Right? A lot of times we want this, so when we want something, we want it right now, we can't wait for it. So we don't have that kind of perseverance that we would need in life to kind of navigate it. Now, here's something that I want you to think about also. Even though people want to become millionaires, overnight, the fact of the matter is that when they do actually go to work, they might become millionaires, but it takes them a long time to actually do it. So they still become millionaires, but it takes them a long time. So for example, if a person is earning $40,000, $40,000 a year, right? Let's say, and I'm trying to be like a little bit of an average, or or like maybe a little bit below average or whatever, in terms of this. I don't know where the 40,000 stands, but like I'm just giving a number like that. So let's say $40,000 a year. Now $40,000 a year, in 10 years you make $400,000, and 20 years you're gonna make 800,000, and in 30 years that's gonna be $1.2 million. So you still became a millionaire, right? Because a lot of people might start working around 25, let's say 22 or 25, whatever. Let's say 25, right? So 25, and then 35, 45, 55, 65. So you might actually make $1.6 million if you're not getting any raises and stuff like that. So in your life, you made, until you retire at 65. So you made that much money, right? But you did it over time. But you didn't think about it like that, right? So this is how it works for us too. How many salawat have you prayed since since it was mandatory for you to pray? It took a long time, right? Every day, if you're doing 365, if you're doing 5, and then you have 365, very roughly, let's say that's like 1700 or something like that, right? So let's say 1700. Let's make it 1500 to make it very easy. So 1500 times 10 years, right? In 1 year, you made 15. You paid 1500 salawat, and then in 10 years, you prayed 15,000 times. That's a lot. And if you've been praying for 30 years, you've prayed 45,000, let's say roughly 50,000 prayers. So 50,000 prayers, and if all of them get multiplied by 10, right? Because every good deed gets multiplied by 10, that's 500,000 prayers in 30 years. So if you multiply it by 60 years, if you live inshallah 60 years, right? That's 1 million prayers, or the reward for 1 million prayers. That's a lot of, you didn't think about it. And in terms of how many rak'at you did, how many times you said Fatiha and stuff, right? That's a lot more. So if you're doing 17, I'm going to pull up the calculator. So if you're doing 17 times 365 times, let's say you prayed 30 years, right? So that in itself, 17, times you say Fatiha every day because of the 17 rakat of mandatory prayers that you pray, times 365 times 30, that's 186,150. Multiply that by 10, because every good deed, you get, actually, it'd be multiplied by more than 10. So let's say 186,150. If you multiply that by the number of letters that you recite in Fatiha, right, and then multiply that number by 10, the Prophet ﷺ, because he told us every letter in the Quran is 10 good deeds, you can imagine how many good deeds you can accumulate over there. So understanding that it's not the all-in-one, all or nothing mindset, that's going to help us kind of be sustainable. But this is exactly what a lot of people fall into. They want things right now. They don't want to wait for it. They don't want to develop over time and stuff. They just want everything right now. They want to become the best sports player tonight. They want to become the best. They want to memorize the Quran today. They want everything today, right? And if they don't get it today, they're not going to do it. When you want to memorize, or when you want to learn Arabic, for example, a lot of people are going to sort of not do it because you're going to look at it as an entire package. They're going to look at mastery of the Arabic language, which scholars themselves, it took them many years and stuff, right? So, but we sort of look at it as, oh, I need to learn Arabic and I'm going to have to do it all or not, or I can't do it, right? So they look at it as either 0 or 100%. Islam tells us to look at it as consistent steps. So looking at it from 0 to 100 by taking one step at a time until you get to 100. And every day that you add progress to it, then you get closer, ever closer to your 100% mark. But that's not how we look at things a lot of times. And so a lot of times we become stagnant, we become frustrated. When you want to learn a language, maybe let's say you wanted to learn Arabic and you tried and you did it for the first 1 month, and you're like, I was at it, I was studying all day, all night and stuff, and I was just doing it and doing it, and I was trying everything, and it didn't work out for me. Well, because you only did it for 1 month, right? It doesn't make sense for you to learn something in 1 month. So you got to do it over time. And the people say that if you want to learn a language, then you should immerse yourself in it for 3 months or to 6 months, right? 3 to 6 months if you want to learn a language, and you got to be immersed in it. Then that's something that you get some entry-level experience with it and stuff, right? If you want to master it, it takes you a long time. But the way we're looking at it is I tried memorizing Quran, for example, and it didn't work out for me and stuff. I tried it and it was so difficult and stuff. I gave up, after a month or whatever and stuff, right? But you shouldn't look at it like that. If there's let's say 600 times 15, right? So let's say 9,000 lines in the Quran, right? If you memorize one line a day, right, 365 times 10 is 3,650. If you multiply that by 3, then that's 30 years. So in 30 years, you're done with memorizing the Quran. If you just did one line a day, that's it, no more. And one line might take you 10 minutes, maybe 5 minutes if you're doing it faster or whatever. That's it. But if you did it consistently over the course of your life, you could have memorized half the Quran. You could have memorized 3/4 of the Quran, whatever. If you just did one line a day. But if you did 2 lines a day, then it's 15 years. 3 lines a day, then it's 10 years, right? That's it. If you just think about it like that, life becomes a lot easier. So this is something that we sort of struggle with and we give up. If you want to have a good marriage, for example, you want today to be perfect, right? You can't wait for things to develop over the course of time. This person has to be exactly the way I want them to be and stuff, and if they're not, I'm just going to give up and everything, right? But that's not how life works. Life works with small, sustainable steps. You have to take small, consistent steps. So this is something that I want you to be able to differentiate between and understand that if you don't accept this reality, that sustainable growth is the way to go, and you want all or nothing, then you're going to obviously stay frustrated. And you remember the maze that we had in one of the previous sessions, where the person was sort of scratching his head looking at it, and so that was the picture, right? And we said that Allah SWT gave us a guide, and He sort of gave us the solution to the maze. But we sort of look at it, it's like, okay, no, I want to do it my way. Let me just kind of do my own trial and error and stuff. And if it doesn't work, I'm just gonna get frustrated and stuff, right? That's not how it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be that Allah SWT gives you guidance and stuff, and you just accept it, right? And you just move forward, because it's like, hey, go here, take a turn here, go straight here, and do whatever until you get to the end. It's like all the instructions are right there in front of you, but we don't want to do that. Learning Islam, for example, because I brought that up, learning Islam a lot of times for us is an overwhelming burden, and it's like we can't do this and stuff because how am I, it's so much to learn and stuff. Yeah, it's so much to learn. You're right, but the problem is that if you don't start, you're not gonna end anywhere, right? You're just gonna, if you never try something, you're not gonna be able to finish it. You're not gonna be able to get anywhere with it, right? For example, I started, studying Islam a little bit when I was young, and it took a long time to get to where I am right now. And I don't consider myself anywhere, maybe like 0.001% of the way that I want to be, or of the place that I want to be, right? But it's something that over the course of the past few decades, right, I was able to be able to accumulate some information that had I not taken those consistent steps, I would not have been able to. So unless we take those steps, we don't get anywhere. Like I said about the money thing, right? Every single day that you look at it, you might have been getting, what is $4,000 divided by, let's see, 40,000 divided by 12, and then divide by, let's say, 20 work days in a day, in a month. So let's say that you're making $166. I did $40,000 divided by 12 months, divide by 20 work days in a month, right? So $166 a day. So every day that you're doing that, and then let's divide that by 8. So you're making $20, let's say $21 an hour. So as you're making the $21 an hour, right, minute that you're spending, so let's say 20 divided by 60. So you're making 33 cents, 34 cents a minute. So every minute you're making 33 cents, 34 cents, right? But you're not thinking about it like that, right? But that's exactly what you're doing. You're making 33 cents every single minute until you get to your $1 million 30 years later, right? But if you only thought like that, then in everything that we do, things would be a lot easier. Can you imagine like sitting there in front of a computer and making like 33 cents or 50 cents, let's say, whatever, depending on your income? You're making that much money every single minute. If you thought about it like that, that I'm only getting like maybe 2 quarters every minute, you're probably gonna get really frustrated and annoyed, right? And you're like, this is too much. I can't take this. But you look at it sort of like, it's okay. I'm gonna keep doing this until I get my day's worth of $166, because 2 quarters, from 2 quarters to $166, that's a huge change, right? From going to 166 a day to $1 million, like 30 years later, that's a huge thing too, right? That's a huge difference. So how you frame it, it's going to help you in terms of avoiding stress and frustration and so on. Now, let's go to the next thing. The Prophet ﷺ, what did he say? What did Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tell? What is this guidance? What is the capital T truth? Capital T truths tell us. What do they tell us? They tell us that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us in the Quran, in Surah Al-Baqarah, that we're going to surely test you, and this test right here is going to be of different kinds. It could be, for example, from fear, it could be hunger, it could be loss of wealth, it could be lives and fruits that you'll be losing, it could be a loss of any of these things, right? Any of these things could be. But then he says, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, as if to say that the sabr over here is the end objective. So, وَبَشِّرِ الصَّابِرِينَ, give glad tidings to the sabirun. Who are sabirun? Well, it says, in here, usually we translate it as patient. But patient in English sort of sounds very passive. So what you want to understand with that is, patience is one aspect, but it's not the complete picture of sabr. Sabr is more active. It's something that you're constantly doing. It took me some time to understand this. Maybe like 10 years or more than 10 years ago, I used to ask one of my friends about this, about different situations. It's like, how do you navigate this? And he would say, have sabr. And I was like, what does that mean? What do I do? How do I do sabr, right? And it took me some time until like some years back, sort of an experience that I was going through. And then it was like, oh, that's what sabr means. Sabr just means that that there's an end objective that you have, or there's this end thing that you're looking for, is on the path that you're taking, but you just don't know when that time is going to come, when you're going to get there, right? You don't know how far you are from it, and you don't know how much time you have left before you get there. So you just know that if you stick on this path, you're going to get to wherever it is that you need to get to, and that's it. That's what sabr is. Like, you just keep going forward because you know that you have to keep moving to get to the end result. If you stay where you're at, kind of sitting back, right, you're not going to get anywhere. So you got to keep moving. So an example that I give usually is like, going on I-40 all the way to Wilmington Beach, right? If you take the highway all the way there, you're gonna get there, right? Then you're gonna pretty much like get from here to there, that area. And even if you lose your GPS, in this case, let's assume that you lost your GPS or maybe your battery died and stuff, and that's it, right? But you know that as long as you stick on this path, you're gonna get to that end. You just don't know how long you have left. You don't know how far you are and stuff. You just know that if you stick to this path, you're gonna get there. That's it. So you can imagine it like that. But if you were sort of stuck here and sort of pulled your car over to the shoulder and you're just like, you know what? I don't know. I'm just gonna wait it out and stuff until I get there, right? You're not gonna get anywhere because you pulled on the side of the road. You're stopped, right? So don't stop. Don't let it just hit you. Just keep moving forward despite what happens to you, right? Despite whatever hits you, despite whatever happens, you keep moving forward. That's the idea of sabr. So it's more like grit, Grit, grit. It's more like perseverance. That's what it is, right? So Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala is saying, give glad tidings to them, as if that end mindset, that way of living, right, is the end objective of it. That no matter what happens, you don't just sit back and just stop. You keep moving forward despite the hunger, despite the fear, despite the loss of wealth, lives, and food. Despite all of that, you just don't stop. You just keep moving forward because you're transitioning from this life to the next life, and you know that you're going to go to Hayat al-Barzakh, then after that you're going to have the Day of Judgment, and so on, right? So that's the objective. You're moving forward. Your life is going to move forward. Time is going to keep running. It's not going to go back, right? It's just going to keep going forward and forward and forward. That's it. So you have to just sort of like just hop on the train and keep moving forward as well. Don't stop. Don't just sort of like get stuck and not move forward. And when trials are happening, it's not supposed to stop you. That's not the objective of trials, right? And I'm going to talk about what the objective of trials is in a second. But that's not the objective. That's not to just sort of stop and just walk out and stuff, right? Yeah, you should reflect on the trial itself. But reflection doesn't need to mean like you just stop everything and stuff and just like stop your life and that's it, right? Reflection can happen on the go as well. Let's say, you're reflecting on, why is this happening? I wonder if I'm doing something haram, for example. So let me stop that, right? That you can do that reflection as you go. But don't sort of like stop your life and become stagnant in life. And that's it. I'm not going to do anything and stuff. And that's until the tests go away and stuff. No, you keep moving forward. You analyze the situation. You keep doing that as you go forward. You reflect. You make changes and stuff. But you just don't stop, right? And again, I want to differentiate that from like stopping to think about what's happening, right? I don't mean that. I don't mean to say that don't do that. What I mean is like do that as you keep moving forward in life, as a composite, as a whole thing. But don't just stop in life just because. Don't give up in life. Don't just pause and just kind of like done. I can't take life anymore and stuff. Don't do that, right? That's what I don't want you to do. But what I am saying that you should do is to reflect and so on. Okay, so that's that. And Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala mentions about the people that do this. They have this framework in mind that whenever something bad happens, something big happens, right? They frame it like this. They say, well, this is exactly, we all belong to Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala. We're going to return to Him and stuff. So it doesn't really matter. Allah tests us with food, right? He gave us something, He tested us, and He can take it away, and that'd be another test, right? So I can just look at everything that I have as a test, good or bad, right? And that's it. So they always have this mindset like this. So when they lose something, they don't become stressed about it. And when they gain something, they don't become overly excited about it. When I say overly, it's like more than you should, right? So you should understand that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala giving you something is part of His test, right? It's a blessing, but it's also a test. How are you going to navigate? How are you going to utilize it? And if you utilize it in a bad way, then it can actually count against you, right? So you're going to be asked about everything on the Day of Judgment. Every ni'mah that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala gave you, you're going to be asked about on the Day of Judgment. So how you frame it is going to impact how you navigate. People, they've lost their kids, for example. So what happens, if a parent loses their kid is different than a kid losing their parent, right? Everything is different about it. So like the mindset and stuff, things are different, right? So when a parent loses their kid, there is a hadith about how the Prophet told us that Allah Subhanahu wa Ta'ala has a conversation with the angels and stuff like that when they take somebody's child, for example, or somebody's friend or whatever. So there's this conversation. I'm not going to go into that, but I want you to see if you can, find the hadith and stuff, right? But my point of this is that how you frame things impacts how you address situations like that. So if a parent loses their child, some of them are going to go, like, they're going to get overwhelmed, they're going to get so stressed out and frustrated, they're going to start crying, they're going to give up life pretty much, right? I can't take this. Instead, they're going to get into depression. On the other hand, there are some parents who are going to say, no, this is from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, Allah is testing us and stuff, and they're going to have this mindset. I know some people that, have taken it both ways. One group of people has taken, parents, right, when they lost their kids, they took it a very certain way. Others, it tore them apart. So it depends on how you frame it, in terms of how you're going to be able to navigate it thus. Okay, so what is the purpose of test? Because I said I'm going to mention that. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned that as well. He says that life is created so that He can test you. Life and death is created so that He can test you, to see which of you is in the best of deeds. Which of you has the best of deeds. So this is the framework right here. So tests are guaranteed in life, but they're also there because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants to test how you're going to navigate them, how you're going to, how are you going to go through these tests. So on the one hand, you can look at tests as, oh, here we go, here's another, big problem in my life and stuff, and I must be a screw up or whatever and stuff, or my life is all like messed up or whatever, and life is not fair, whatever and stuff. You can have that framework, or you can say, oh, here's another test for me to shine and sort of like pass this test so I can get to the next level up. So how you frame it is going to have a big impact. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is telling you over here that tests are guaranteed, so you're not going to get away from them. So accepting them is the first step towards like navigating them, right? But if you're going to not accept them and you're like, no, why is this test happening? I don't want this test and stuff, I hate tests and stuff, right? Then you're not going to be able to go forward. But then if you frame it like this, like, oh, tests are guaranteed, the next one that comes up, it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala giving me an opportunity to rise and shine, essentially, right? To show Him how much I've grown as a person and stuff, and how I am capable of navigating this test and stuff. I want to be able to show this and stuff, right? When people go up for promotions, for example, if they want they want a raise in terms of salaries or whatever, they want to show that they've been able to do certain things, that they're going to be able to do certain things and so on. They like that, right? When you pass tests in school, when you take the SAT, for example, the idea is to succeed in it, to do really good in it, so that you can show colleges what you're capable of, essentially, right? Of how good you are and stuff and so on, in terms of you being able to be selected and stuff. When you go for job interviews, it's the same thing. You want to show that you have all this experience and this expertise and stuff like that. So if you look at it like that, if you look at life like that, then it makes it a lot easier. In fact, it becomes sort of exciting and fun and motivating and stuff. You're always constantly looking forward to the next challenge, right? So you reframe it. And by the way, I'm gonna pause here for a second. We were. Remember, I don't know if you remember, in the very beginning, I said I have another reframing that I'm gonna do later on, inshallah. But I'm not gonna tell you right now. So I'm gonna tell you now. So I told you back then I'm not gonna tell you, but I'm telling you now that this is the time where, now that you guys understand this, the reframing that I was intending is to reframe or reword the name of this webinar. So going from growth through struggles, right? And we're going to change it to use, instead of struggles, use challenges, because for some reason challenges have a more positive connotation to them, right? So that's how we're going to reframe it. It's the same process, same thing that you're going through, but instead of talking about it as a struggle, we're going to talk about it as a challenge, right? So it's the same exact thing that's going on, but how you're framing it is going to be different. So this is what that is. In this context, again, going back to this, if I look at it as a challenge, right, I'm going to be able to navigate it much differently because I'm more excited, right? Where there's a competition, when people are competing in basketball, for example, professional basketball, so they're competing because it's a challenge for them. They're just they get excited about it. They're enjoying it, right? But when they look at it as a struggle, like it's so difficult and stuff, man, I have to wake up in the morning, I have to do this and this and this and then stuff, right? So if they look at it in the more negative way, they're going to be more negative about it. But when they look at it, the same experience, in a more positive way, then they're going to get more excited. They're going to be happier. They're going to be excited. They're going to be passionate about what they do and so on. Okay, the next thing, and continuing on this about purpose of tests. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentions also over here, do the people think that they will be left alone? This is Surah Al-Ankabut, the spider. They think that they're going to be left alone when they say, we believe and that's it, and they're not going to be tested. So, this is the small t truth. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is highlighting the small t truth over here. So I want you to, when you read the Quran, when you read the Hadith of the Prophet and so on, I want you to look at where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala identifies the small t truth, and then He gives you a capital T truth. So here He's telling you the small t truth. By the way, Alif Lam Mim over here, some of the scholars mentioned that it's like sort of like, calling out to the people. It's like, Alif Lam Mim has no meaning that we know of in the in Arabic language, and so that's how that is saying sort of like some of the scholars have mentioned that Alif Lam Mim, the 3 letters right here, it's like saying, hey, Quraysh or whoever, that these are the letters that are part of the alphabet that have been used to make the entire Quran, right? Can you come up with something like it, like a challenge, right? And another like sort of explanation of this is that Alif Lam Mim is sort of getting the attention of people because it doesn't have a meaning, but it's like, something, hey, if you say something like this, it's like everyone's gonna look at you and say like, what did you just say, right? It's like, it kind of catches your attention, and then you can like say the next question of like, do the people think whatever, So anyways, the point over here now is that people sometimes assume a small t truth that they're gonna say we believe, and that's, they're good to go, they're gonna enter into Jannah. But that's not how life works, right? And we know from Surah Al-Imran and Surah Al-Baqarah, أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يأتكم مثل الذين خلوا من قبلكم, and this is in Baqarah, and the other one is أم حسبتم أن تدخلوا الجنة ولما يعلم الله الذين جاهدوا منكم ويعلم الصابرين. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is asking, do you think that you're going to enter into Jannah without being tested like the people before you, right? And then the ayah continues about the kinds of tests, like, extreme poverty and so on. And the other one says, until Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who among you is the that strives, right? So and whoever has sabr among you. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is mentioning that capital T truth over here is that you're going to be tested. You're going to be tested because that's your proof to enter into Jannah. That's your experience, that's your skill set, that's your qualification and stuff to enter into Jannah, essentially, right? Of course, nobody enters into Jannah except with the permission and mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But the idea over here is, do you think you're going to enter into Jannah without being tested like this? So when you come in with your resume, right, your resume needs to show some experience. It needs to show some education, some qualification, some experience and stuff, right? Some sort of growth and development and stuff. You know how you have these certain words that you have to use in resume, active words and stuff. For example, I organize or manage this, or whatever. So this is sort of like what you're doing by going through a test. You're earning your stripes, essentially, right? You have these things that you're putting on your belt, right? These qualifications, these achievements and stuff that you're doing. And so that's the idea with tests. It helps you, it helps in terms of, number one, differentiates you from the people that are just kind of like making up things and they're not ready to take on tests and challenges and stuff, right? They're not really ready to walk the talk, right? But or walk the walk. But on the other hand, there are people that are ready to go and stuff. They're looking forward to Jannah and stuff, and they can't wait to get there and stuff, right? So that's the idea over here. Okay, so here's an example. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, for example, فَأَمَّا الْإِنسَانُ إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ رَبُّهُ فَأَكْرَمَهُ وَنَعَمَهُ فَيَقُولُ رَبِّي أَكْرَمَنِ. This is something that a lot of people memorize, Surah Al-Fajr, right? In Surah Al-Amma, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is saying, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives a person something, He's testing them. So, إِذَا مَا ابْتَلَاهُ means when He's tested. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests him, and He gives him فَأَكْرَمَهُ, so that He gives him, He is generous with him and so on. He honors him, and he gives him many gifts and so on, right? Like many ni'am and stuff. And then this person says, my Lord has honored me. So his small t truth of this person is that he considers, when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bestows him something, he considers that as an honor from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? As opposed to a test. Because the ayah says, when his Lord tests or tries him, right? Instead of looking at it like how it is, a test and a trial, the person is looking at it is, Allah is giving me because He loves me and He's taking care of me, like He's honoring me and stuff, right? And then when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tests him, notice like the capital T truth over here is tries, right? In both cases, it's tries, meaning Allah is testing the person in both cases. So the capital T truth hasn't changed, but the lowercase t right? Our perception of it has changed. It says over here that the person thinks that he is being honored when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives him. And here, nothing changed. From Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's perspective, nothing changed. It's both the test. But from the person's perspective, he considered it as humiliation when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala took away things from him. فَقَدَرَ عَلَيْهِ رِزْقَ, like, sort of constrained the rizq from the person. So there's another ayah in Surah Rum. It says, وَلَوْ بَسَطَ اللَّهُ الرِّزْقَ لِعِبَادِهِ لَبَغَوْا فِي الْأَرْضِ وَلَكِنَّ اللَّهَ يَبْسُطُ الرِّزْقَ لِمَن يَشَاءُ. That if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was to expand the risk of somebody, some of his slaves, right, they would cause corruption. They're gonna become like, they're gonna sort of turn away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're gonna become very bad in the earth. Like, they're gonna cause corruption and chaos and stuff like that, like evil and stuff, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala instead constricts the risk for whoever it is amongst his ibad that he wants, right? And that's it. So the idea is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows who it is best for and who is not best for. And at the same time, he might test you with something. So for his closer servants, for example, especially the ones he wants to give higher levels and stuff, he may not give the like extra risk or whatever, because he knows that if he does, then he might kind of sort of steer away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But for some who are also his higher slaves or whatever, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala might give them something, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows that they're not going to be turned away from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So like, for example, Uthman radiallahu anhu, for example, or Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu, for example, or Abdurrahman bin Auf radiallahu anhu, for example. These were people that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave a lot because he knew that they're not going to lose their closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, essentially, right? They're not gonna get distracted by that money. On the other hand, some of the people like Abu Hurairah radiallahu anhu, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested him in a different way. He didn't give him much in the beginning, right? In the beginning, Abu Bakr radiallahu anhu used to pass out because of hunger, right? Because he didn't have anything. So you have differences, and I'm not saying that Abu Hurairah, if he had a lot of money and stuff like that, he would have been a bad person and stuff. I'm just saying Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tested differently because he knew how to test people best, right? And so that's that. Okay, most difficult of tests, and this is the last few things, inshallah. These are 3 narrations, 3 or 4, I don't remember how many I put in here, that are on the same topic, but and it's like different wording from the same sort of general meaning of the hadith. So it's this narrator right here, Sa'ad bin Sa'ad, over here, is the narrator over here, and he's saying that he heard from his father that Sa'ad bin Abi Waqqas, he was one of the 10 promised Jannah, and he is narrating this from the Prophet ﷺ. So it was said, or he asked the Prophet ﷺ, who is the one that's most tested, most severely tested? He says, Ayyun nas ashaddu bil bala. Ashad over here is like very severe, like the most severe, like Allahu Akbar, right? Allahu Akbar. Akbar is the most, the greatest, right? So Ashad is like the most, it's like the superlative aspect in this case, the most severely tested. And Bala over here is that word, like the word ibtila that we had in the previous verses from Surah Al-Fajr. That's the same root word over here. So who is the most severely tested? And then the Prophet said, the Prophet and then he said, after that are those like him, and then those like them. And then he says that everyone is going to be tested based on the level of their deen. So based on where your status is with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you're going to be tested like that. So here, the most severely tested are these because they have the closest, they're the closest relation to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The more you're going to be tested, the closer that you want to get to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more difficult your tests are going to be, which makes sense, right? Because the higher levels have more difficult tests. A first grader has a certain test that, if I was to take that first grader test, it's going to be a lot easier for me than to take a 12th grader, like let's say, I don't know, English test, for example, right? Versus if I'm doing a degree in college, for example, and it's my like term paper or whatever, or my let's say senior design or senior project or whatever from my last year in college for whatever major that I'm doing, right? That's going to be a lot more difficult. Or if I want to go to a graduate school, if I want to pass, if I want to become let's say I want to do the bar exam, right? For if I want to practice law, then that's going to be a lot more difficult than a first grader test, right? And it makes sense because you're getting higher and higher and higher, right? So this is exactly how this works over here too. Everyone's going to be tested based on wherever they stand with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the higher that you want to go, expect the test to be more challenging, right? I'm going to say challenging instead of difficult. And then the hadith continues, and the person is going to be tested more and more. And if a person is not so close to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their tests are not going to be as difficult, right? And also, when you get tested, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wipes away your sins and so on. So this is that. Trials will continue to afflict the person until they leave him walking on the earth with no sin on him. So some of the Sahaba, for example, and there's one of them that she used to say, radiallahu anha, that every time that she would have any kind of like difficulty or stress or even a fever, so anytime she would have a fever, for example, she might say that this is because of the sin that I've committed. And that's the Sahaba radiallahu anhum, all of them are in Jannah inshallah because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is pleased with them. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala mentioned in the Quran that He's pleased with them and they're pleased with Him, right? So we know that, but yet every time she had a fever, she would say that this is because of a sin that I've committed. And for them, the standard of sin was where like it was more stringent in the sense that like what we might consider as like a minor nuisance and stuff, like, okay, well, I made a mistake. If I like, I might say, for example, I might have looked at a person in a certain way that wasn't really evil or whatever and stuff, or it wasn't like really like off-putting and stuff, but it was just something that wasn't the best quality. So they might consider that as a sin for themselves, right? Because their standard is a lot higher. And so the Prophet also had a higher standard. Anything that they did and stuff like that, they're how they would grade themselves or how they would sort of have their grading done by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was more difficult, more strict than let's say somebody like new to Islam, for example, right? And I mentioned this just to say like the comparison of like who has more expectation compared to who has lesser expectation from them. Okay, so Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is objective over here. One of the objectives is to also purify you of your sins. And there's many verses in the hadith on this topic. And one of them is that a person who has a fever or like any kind of stress or whatever, even the pricking of a thorn, all of this expiates his sins like the leaves falling off a tree. So another narration on this goes that the Prophet ﷺ, I was asked, which of the people is most freely tested. He said this, and it's the same similar wording, but it is in a different book. And notice I didn't mention this over here. Kitab al-Fitan is the name of the chapter over here, or like the book, and then Bab al-Sabr ala al-Bala, the chapter of sabr in the face of trials or tests. Right? That's the way that the author Ibn Majah, rahimahullah, the way he organized his Sunan Ibn Majah, and this is what he put in it. So this is the hadith in that particular section of his book. And then at-Tirmidhi, Imam at-Tirmidhi, rahimahullah, he was one of the students of Imam al-Bukhari. So this is at-Tirmidhi is one of the students of Imam al-Bukhari, and a lot of times he asks him questions. So you might say, like, I asked Muhammad, for example, this, whatever, and he means Imam al-Bukhari over here. So he writes over here in his book, is Kitab al-Zuhd an Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So what we like, this is the chapter, this is the book of Zuhd, and what we know from the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam about that topic. And then he says, Bab ma ja'a fi sabr ala al-bala, that this is a chapter of what has been narrated about what has come for, on the topic of sabr ala al-bala, in the context of tests and trials. And notice that this is sort of what he put also, Bab sabr ala al-bala, the same way that he mentioned it. And so over here again, it's the same hadith, but he mentions it in this particular thing. Now this is a different wording, and this was the one that when the Prophet ﷺ, and this is Abu Sa'id al-Khudri radiallahu anh, when he entered the Prophet ﷺ and he had a fever, he placed his hand on his head and he felt the heat over there. It was like, it was really, really hot. It was a lot hotter than normal people. So he asked the Prophet ﷺ about this, and the Prophet ﷺ responds that the prophets have this test, like they have a more difficult, more stressful test than other people do. And so the trial is multiplied for us, and so is the reward. So the higher you go, the more difficult the trial is going to be, the more rewarding it'll be. So this is the same rule for all of us. The closer you are to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the higher the level you have with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the more difficult your test is going to be, but also, naturally, as it's fair, that you're going to get a higher reward. So the scholars, for example, the ulama of the deen and stuff, like Imam Bukhari, for example, himself, he went through a lot of trials and tribulations and so on. So this is something to keep in mind. Now this is Sunan Ibn Majah as well, and this is what he put in the same section of the book, and he mentioned this hadith in there. And he said that the prophets are the ones that are most tested, and then he said, who is after that? And he said, then the righteous ones, and then here he used the word ثُمَّ الصَّالِحُونَ. So Salihun are the ones after the Anbiya, right? And then after that, the Prophet ﷺ mentioned some of them are are tested, so after that the righteous ones, and they're tested with poverty until they could not find anything except a cloth to put around themselves. One of them will rejoice at calamity as one of you would rejoice at ease. This is the framework that I wanted you to take away from this. That one of them will rejoice at calamity because he understands what the objective of the test is, as you would rejoice when you don't have those tests. Meaning, when many of the people, they look at trials and tribulations and stuff as like a bad thing. They just like, they want to get away from it, right? And it makes sense. Things are going to be a little bit, more difficult and stuff, right? But they look at it as like, man, here we go again, sort of, right? Like, why is this happening, or whatever. They have that negative understanding of it. And anytime they're living like, without tests and trials, they're happy and stuff. They sort of like want to build their life over here. They, they get these houses and stuff, some of them get really big houses and stuff, and you're sort of thinking that they're going to live their life here and that's it, right? They're going to enjoy it. And I'm not saying necessarily that, that in itself, getting a big house in itself is bad. But I am saying that how it ends up being, they have this like safety net sort of feeling of like, if I get this much money, if I have this big house, if I have this family and this whatever, then I'm going to be able to navigate life. I'm going to be able to sort of defeat all these tests and stuff that are going to come to me, because I'm going to be able to get rid of them and not have to go through them, right? And I'm going to be able to live life according to that mindset, sort of. So that is a problem, and that's what makes us, in the face of trials, become very negative people, right? Have negative interactions and negative mindsets and so on, and we become into cycles and stuff. And so that's not a person that's gonna like be closer to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala like that. On the other hand, a person who faces calamity is actually going to become rejoiced. And some people actually, like one of the scholars mentioned that trials and tests are like the heat and the cold, right? You just sort of expect it as sort of take it for granted, just like you take the cold, the weather, the changes in weather are sort of granted, right? It's like, okay, well, it's winter time and it's summertime or whatever, sort of adapting to it, right? Instead of doing that, if you don't do that, if you're sort of like always like thinking, okay, well, you don't have a framework in mind, yeah, everything that's going to happen, you're going to get flustered easily. So if you have this in mind, oh, it's fall is coming up or whatever, and then like this is going to come, and then this is going to come. So if you have the right mindset, you're going to be able to navigate according to that. We know that the summertime, we sort of plan around it. Instead, we put that in our schedule. We know when so summer, spring, fall, right? When we have all these seasons in our mind, we've sort of put in our calendars. Everyone sort of, the entire world sort of adapted to it, and that's it. When we have adapted, we're going to navigate according to that. But if you're not going to adapt it, everything is going to become new to you, right? When fall season comes, you're going to be surprised. When spring comes, you're going to be surprised. When summer comes, you're going to be surprised. And you're going to always live on this edge, right? And you're going to always constantly be like stressed out and worried. What's going to happen next? What's going to happen next? It's like flipping a coin to you, right? But if you accept the truth, it's like, oh, okay, I've sort of understood it. It's part of my life and stuff. I've scheduled it in my life. I'm good to go, and that's it. Now, the reward of trials, the Prophet mentions over this, about this, the greatest reward comes with the greatest trial. So we sort of mentioned that, right, in the previous hadith. And when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a people, He tests them. And another narration goes that if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has, like, He intends, He uses the word arada, that when He intends good for somebody, He tests them. Yusib minhu. And then in this case, this wording says when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the people, إِذَا أَحَبَّ قَوْمًا, whenever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves a people, and this, the word over here is the hub over here. Hub is like love, right? When He loves the people, He tests them. And notice the same word ibtida over here, right? And again, Ibn Majah, same chapter, same section that we talked about before. So when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves the people, He tests them. Whoever accepts that, whoever is pleased with it, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's pleasure is with him. And whoever is displeased with it, whoever sort of angry and upset at this test that he's gotten, then for him is the anger of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. In other words, this is how life works. This is your capital T truth. I hope that made sense, and I hope that it gave you an understanding of how to frame everything, how to understand life, understanding, what the purpose of tests and trials are. When you lose a person, when somebody that you love, what's the objective behind it? Why did you lose that person? How should you navigate therefore that situation? When the world sort of shut down, what was the idea behind it, right? And one of the things we know, for example, when there's sin and corruption happening in some places, or if it's widespread, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sort of, if we don't intervene, we don't try to stop it actively, and the majority is on the sin and the minority, for example, is not being able to hold them off or whatever, and it's sort of widespreading, then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is going to intervene, because sin is necessarily harmful, and the opposite of that is necessarily beneficial and stuff, right? So anything that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has prohibited is because it's harmful, right? And so that's the idea. So if these things are happening, then it's harming people. People's rights are being taken away. Bad things are happening in the world and stuff, right? So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is gonna intervene if we are not able to do it and stuff, and it's gonna impact even the people that are righteous, because the ayah says that وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةَ الَّذِينَ لَا يُصِيبُهُمُ الَّذِينَ منكم خاصة, that have be mindful of a fitna of that doesn't impact only the bad ones among you. وَاتَّقُوا فِتْنَةً لَا تُصِيبَنَّ الَّذِينَ ظَلَمُوا مِنكُمْ خاصة, that it doesn't impact only the bad ones among you, only the ones who are oppressors and stuff, or bad doers and stuff. It doesn't only impact them, it impacts everyone, right? So be aware of that. So always constantly be trying to stop evil and bad things and stuff and haram stuff or whatever around you, right? Even if people are not sort of they haven't taken that as the capital T truth. They want to just do their own sins as their capital T truth, right? Or their perceived capital T truth. You still have to intervene in that. If you don't intervene, then some things are going to happen. So that's why the fish in the ocean, for example, when a scholar is existing on the earth and he's calling people to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and so on, that becomes the reason why there's punishment that's averted from places. So, for example, in communities, you might see that people are being ravaged, or not people, like a lot of tests and trials are taking place over there. Like a lot of bad things are happening over there, like natural disasters and stuff constantly keep occurring over there, right? So you might start seeing, if you look at the map, where are those disasters really taking place, so you can compare, sort of look at that and compare where are the crimes taking place, where are the haram stuff happening and stuff like that. So always be able to compare the two things, right? If you see there's a lot of corruption and bad things happening, or like haram stuff or happening whatever in a certain place, then you also see over there bad things happening in terms of natural disasters and things like that. So be always on the lookout for these things, because life will make sense then, because you see the reasons why it's happening, right? And you also see where people or where things are not happening like that. So you're gonna see the absence of a lot of these things over there. For example, Allah Adam, this was the case and stuff, but like one of the observations I had during Hurricane Florence, for example, was the triangle area was sort of protected from Hurricane Florence. It was going to go directly through the triangle, like through Raleigh and so on, but then it sort of made like a curve around it. So if you go back and type in Google Hurricane Florence route, or like NC, for example, it'll show you how it sort of went around this, as if there was like a dome around this or whatever. So maybe there were people over here that were actively, engaged in like prohibiting the evil, for example, and then like encouraging the good things and stuff. So maybe that became a barrier for everyone that was living in North Carolina, even the animals that were living in here, because they were protected as well, right? So keep that in mind. And there's a lot of proof on this from the Quran and the Sunnah, that whenever, for example, the Prophet is in a place, then Allah is not going to punish the people when the Prophet is among them, right? Or the righteous people when they're around and stuff. So these things are lessons that we can take away from this, inshallah. So with that, homework is to fill that chart that we had before. This one right here, add more things. Now that you have more information about, like how life works and so on, you can add on more truths over here, and then compare it to how the world takes their perspective on it, and where that disconnect leads to stress and difficulties and like frustration and depression and anxiety and all that stuff. So we want to make sure that we don't fall in that trap. So with that, if there are any questions, we can answer that, inshallah. If not, then we can go ahead and close. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك أشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت أستغفرك وأتوب إليك. جزاكم الله خيرا. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله وبركاته.